Over to you, Noshir and Elsa.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's event titled Improve Your Bid Response, which is the second part of a two-part series. We had part one on the 8th of March called Introduction to Bid Writing. And just to say, if you've missed any of the previous webinars, please let me know and I'll email you the previous recordings. We will be recording this evening's event, so may I ask you to remain on mute throughout the whole presentation to allow our guest speaker, Noshir Desai, to be heard. I'm going to ask if you've got any questions for our speaker, to Noshir, kindly put them in the chat section and we'll gladly share them with him. Okay, if you're here for the first time, as I say, welcome. And just to say that Brent Council engaged Brandwin Business Support Services to manage the Brent BCAP programme, which will enable and strengthen the community leadership through building capacity, support the Black community through a programme, strengthen procurement opportunities, and provide support for employment and enterprise. If you get involved in the programme as a business, we at Brandwin will ensure that you're involved in our one-to-one sessions that will help you to think through your business in an innovative way, and at the same time enable you to be prepared for any bid opportunities that are available. Okay, so again, if you're interested in any of the one-to-ones, kindly leave your details in the chat and I'll actually follow up with you tomorrow. Okay, we do actually try and encourage our one-to-one sessions to be online, and it's about helping you to stand out from the crowd. We have a more positive yet confident approach, and that is actually needed, especially in these current times. And it's actually about sharing good practices. And again, we do that through our webinars as well, and you'll see that this evening. So now we have the opportunity to hear from our bids and tender specialist advisor, who has worked on several business support programs like this one in the last couple of years. So it's my pleasure to introduce Noshir Desai. Over to you, Noshir.
Great, thank you very much, Elsa, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second of our bidding skills webinars. If you missed the first one, don't worry. As Elsa said, there are recordings for you to view at your leisure. And if you did attend the last one, you'll know that these sessions are interactive as much as they can be. I'm a firm believer that if you sit here listening to me for an hour, you will hopefully learn something. But if you actually do something and actually get a chance to work on some of these things for your own business, then you're more likely to take it in and actually take some positive action. So don't be shy, do feel free to get involved. As Elsa said, cameras and off please, and have yourself on mute. Anything in the chat, and we'll answer them either as we go along or towards the end. The other thing I always ask everyone to do on my webinars is commit to one thing that you're going to do as a result of sitting in and listening and attending this webinar. Commit that to yourself, commit that to me, and I might even ask you to put in the chat at the end what it is you're going to do. So we've got about an hour, so let's get started. I'll basically work on the first technology challenge, which is to share the screen. Let's see if that works. Okay, hopefully you can all see that. If you can't, someone please unmute yourself and tell me, and we'll have to work on it. But no, hopefully that's fine. So let's kick off. A very brief introduction to me and my background. Sorry if you were here the first time, I'll keep it short and sweet. My background is essentially 30 years in Lloyds Bank. I did a number of roles in that time, but one of the key things I was involved with was a lot of tendering, both for international banks and when I was the head of the government team for Lloyds covering London and the South East. And that really involved new tenders and re-tenders for both local authorities and also central government departments. They could be quite complex, quite large, quite detailed, 50, 70, 100-page documents. But the fundamental principles, which I will talk to you about today, are very similar, whether the document is a complex one or it's perhaps something a little bit smaller and more simple. So a reasonable amount of experience, As Elsa said, I've worked on a number of these support programs during lockdown and COVID, in particular the Hounslow Fit to Bid program, very similar to this, which is all about helping local SMEs, I guess, get a bit more confident and get a better understanding of how to bid and tender for larger, both public sector and private sector contracts. I'm an advisor with Branduin. As you know, we're tasked with delivering this program on behalf of Brent Council, and we're a group of 20 or so specialist advisors. And I guess our USP is we all either run or have run our own businesses. I've got a couple of businesses, and as you can see, one of them is a small social care business, in addition to the business advisory work that I do. So that's my 40 years of experience in a minute. Right, let's get on to it. So what are we going to cover today, and what have we covered? As it says, these sessions are interactive. They're interactive because, as I said, I think by doing, you learn more. The first one is available on the Branduin YouTube channel. I'll give you the details in a minute. And today we'll move on from that. But I will do a bit of a refresher of what we covered in the first session, which I think is good for people who did attend. And if you didn't attend, it'll just give you an idea of the sort of things that we talked about and discussed. Everything I talk about this evening is all based around actual bidding and tendering best practice experience that I've seen, that we as a company have seen. And it's based around, as it says, excellence in selling. And what I mean by that is some SMEs do think that the bidding process is a form-filling exercise. And let me tell you, if you didn't know, it's much more than that. You're always selling yourself, you're selling your business. So if you treat it as purely as an administrative exercise, you're probably not going to be moving along the right track. So it is always about selling you and your company. So just a reminder of some of the things we have covered and will cover. It's all about how to get yourself in a better position to submit a winning bid. We looked last time at why organisations go to tender, what sort of things they look for, talked about the basics. I'll do a little refresher on that. And then I started to introduce some golden rules and gave you some tips and recommendations as to what can help you submit a winning bid. We looked at the questioning technique, the objectives of the tender, how you fully understand and how you respond fully to those questions, how you'll present your solution, what its key selling points are, articulating benefits as opposed to features, how you add value, providing evidence to back up your story, and the sort of research you can also do to help you get a better understanding of your client, and finally, how you write a clear, compelling, accurate bid response. So that's an overview of the sort of things we have covered and will cover. So as I said earlier, if you haven't had a chance to sort of sit in on the first session, it is available on the Branduin YouTube channel. Take a look, and it'll give you some tips and techniques, as well as some ideas as to what we talked about in a bit more detail. So it's all about helping you as local SMEs to win more large contracts, and do that in both the public and the private sector. The cycle is, we'll talk and have talked about how you engage with procurement, and there is a webinar that was actually done quite recently, some of you may have attended, by the head of procurement. I think that was Rajesh Shori at Brent Council, and in that he talks about and tells you exactly what Brent Council are looking for in suppliers and where their key points of spend are and the sort of things that they want from their bidders. So again, do have a look at that if you haven't had a chance. There's an online bid capability assessment. It's a very short questionnaire, and it allows us to do an assessment of where you are in the tendering and bidding process as a company. And from that, we can look at how we can help and improve your bidding skills. As I said, it's a sales process. You're selling yourself, you're selling your company, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how we do that. And finally, we have the one-to-one tender advice sessions with Elsa. I know some of you have had that, and they're confidential one-to-one sessions where you can bring up issues that are particularly specific to you and your business. So quite interesting. That's our let's launch sign. Brief Reminder of the program benefits. There are a lot of benefits. This program has been running for some time. I think it keeps running till June. You get constant assessment and support throughout it. And as you can see, I won't go through everything. It's all about improving your bid writing skills. And it's giving you that knowledge. It's giving you that confidence and the skills to implement best practices for you in your business to put you in a stronger position. You have the one-to-one sessions. Will help you with getting to a point where you can submit what are called expressions of interest. That's when you're showing that you're interested in bidding for a specific type of business. We'll help you with your writing skills, and we'll do some work on that today. We'll also work with you to help you complete a tender business model canvas, which is a slightly wider review of your business, but very much focused towards tendering. What's your value proposition? You know, how do you specifically align that to procurement department? Because that's often where you would be dealing with as your first port of call, first point of contact when you're dealing with larger organizations. And there's going to be and is regular feedback, engagement, and support throughout the program. So if you are looking to get into larger contracts and bid and tender for these things, then this really is a good program to help you get that confidence and build up those skills. So I'll just do a very quick reminder of what sort of things we covered in part one. I don't think it does any harm for even people who were there. As a reminder, it sort of sinks in a bit better. So we looked initially about why organizations go to tender, what they look for, because it's quite a detailed process for both the company in the business out to tender and for you as a potential supplier. I talked to you about enabling the company to complete a fair and objective comparison, because they put these same questions out to the market to all suppliers, so everyone's in the same position. So you would hope by doing that, it minimizes their risk in selecting particular suppliers. I talked about compliance with certain policies and terms and conditions. We looked at also the fact that they want to achieve a sustainable competitive price, not the cheapest price, but a sustainable competitive price. And they'll always be looking for companies a return on investment. What value for money are they getting from you and your organization? How would you deliver efficiencies? And preferably the sort of efficiencies that you can demonstrate are measurable. Do you have an innovative mindset? How would you drive higher value through their organization? I talked about your level of competency. How will you prove that you have the ability to actually undertake the contract? Are you a good cultural fit? How do you communicate? Do you have a problem-solving ethic? Do you take accountability when things go wrong? Because invariably things do go wrong. This is the real world. We know that. So there are a lot of things we talked about initially in terms of why they go to tender and what organizations look for. I then touched upon getting the basics right. This is, to a point, a bit of a form filling exercise sometimes. You'll often have a supplier questionnaire that I discussed, and it just means you have to complete certain specific information about you and your company. And you've got to get that basic information right and complete every box in that situation, because otherwise you won't even make the first cut in terms of shortlisting. With public sector companies, I talked about there's often a form of tender which you need to sign, which shows that you've read and understand the terms and conditions. You might be asked to provide references and referees. I made what might seem an obvious point to make sure you tell those referees of yours in advance that they're providing their details so they're ready if they're approached by the company. You may be asked to provide some financial information, some policy details, and you'll typically be asked to complete some sort of pricing template. And the other thing I talked about is the importance of planning. We'll touch a little bit more about that now and how you can demonstrate to the organization your thought process and how you will deliver that service that you're tendering for. We looked at understanding the questions in specific detail and the objectives of the organization. I started to introduce some golden rules to you. We did a little exercise on how to fully understand and make sure you answer all parts of the questions to ensure that you give your chance with the evaluators to get the best possible score. What are the objectives of the company, not just now, but looking forwards? How can you demonstrate you're a forward-thinking organization. Where do you find the information about the company? You can find it in the invitation to tender. You can do some research. There's lots and lots of information out there I talked about to increase your understanding. You can ask questions of the organization to get a better understanding if you're not clear. And I talked about how you can add value and demonstrate you can do that, because that's a key differentiator for you against your competition. And if you can do all those sort of things, it'll help you maximize your score. And just finally, as I said, we talked about how you can research the client in greater detail, what the different sources were, everything from their website to their social media channels, strategy documents, and what sort of things to look for. What are the key challenges within their business, within their sector? What sort of things are they saying? What language are they using? They'll often have a supplier definition. So can you meet those criteria? You know, how do you start to build relationships with the client? Because often you'll be tendering for business with a client perhaps that you've never met. How do you start to engage? How do you find out who are the key influencers, who are the key decision makers? And as all part of that, how do you then stand out from the competition? As I said last time, the more you know about your client in advance, the better it is for you and the more comprehensive you can make your bid. So that's a just quick summary of what we covered in part one. As I said, there's more details in terms of the recording of the original webinar if you want to go into more depth on that. So I talked a bit about winning bid elements. I started to introduce some ideas to you in terms of golden rules. We talked about the right price. And when I say the right price, it's not necessarily, in fact, it's often not the cheapest price. So you need to know your market. You need to know your competition. And we talked about some of the golden rules. We looked at how you answer those questions, how you answer them comprehensively and fully in accordance with the evaluation criteria. We talked about how you can demonstrate a broader understanding of the company's objectives and needs. And then going forward, how you are going to demonstrate that you are able to deliver the service. How can you ensure and convince the client that you have a credible, competent solution? We'll talk a little bit about the benefits. It's no good telling a company what you can do in isolation without actually turning that into a value-added benefit for them. So it's all about being on their agenda and understanding what's important to them. And then how can you support those words with evidence? What sort of thing can you do to convince the company that you're not just saying all these helpful words and good words, but you've got proof, you've got backup, and we'll talk a bit about that and how you can do that this evening. And then finally, we'll talk and I'll show you how to write clearly, concisely, and leanly. So basically what I'm saying there is, how do you get the information across in a way that's clear, concise, and not padded out with words which are superfluous to the bid response? So we'll focus on those four areas, squared off in red there in this session today. Okay, so first golden rule. Here's my analogy. If you were thinking of starting to climb or planning to climb a mountain or climb Everest, you'd do some planning, right? You think about what equipment you need, what level of skill do you need, who's going to help you, what are the weather conditions, what's the right approach? Do you go up the north face? Do you go up the south face? You'd factor in and think about all these things before you started getting on your journey up the mountain. And the point I'm making there is, you need to do all those things to ensure you meet your objective. And it's no different when you're responding to a tender request. You need to plan. You need to think about things very carefully and then be able to demonstrate to the client your thought process. And as a result of your thought process, you're planning your steps, how you're going to meet their criteria. So I want to talk about the overarching question of how. How are you going to deliver? And as it says there, how equals who, what, when, where, and why. And I'm just going to touch upon that in a bit more detail. So firstly, how are you going to describe how you'll do the work? How will you substantiate that information? Who's going to deliver it? Are you a one-man band? In that case, it'd be you. Do you have partners you work with? Perhaps you subcontract some of the work out. Depending on who you're going to get to deliver that response, you need to give some background. You need to specify roles, use people's names if possible. Who's going to own certain parts of the process? And then moving on from that, what's your approach to your solution? What steps will you take? Can you demonstrate the methodology and the processes that you will go through to ensure you can deliver that solution? What products do you need? Do you need some specialist equipment, some materials? What tools will you need if it's a practical project? What SLAs are you going to put in place? SLAs, service level agreements, if you're not familiar with the term, which basically determines exactly what you'll deliver in terms of your service offer, and it's measurable. And then with any project, there'll be a timeline. There'll be specific schedules that you have to meet, specific milestones and goals, particular frequencies. When are you going to do that? How are you going to meet the deliverables timetable? How are you going to track it? How are you going to monitor it? Who's going to track it and monitor it? And then where are you going to deliver this solution? It could be anywhere. It could be at the location of the client. You may have an off-site facility. There might be a team member who says, well, or a partner who says you can use our office. What's the geographic distribution, for example, of the client? Where are they located? Think about all these things when you're trying to demonstrate how you're going to basically deliver. And then ultimately, it's all about why. Why have you chosen this particular approach? What's your rationale? What's your thought process? And as it says, how and why have you linked benefits to the things you've said you can do? Have you demonstrated how you can add value? And what other options perhaps have you considered and discounted? And if you have, why did you do that? Because the more you can demonstrate that thought process, the more considered your response will be. And consequently, you'll be much more likely to be on the way to a winning bid. Okay, so quite a lot of information on that slide. Let's move on to USP, unique selling proposition. We've all heard that. You know, everyone says, what's a USP? What makes you stand out and what makes you different from your competition? The key word there is unique. And it is used very casually because, you know, you hear people saying, oh, it's partially unique. It's fairly unique, but it can't be fairly unique. It's either unique or it's not. As you can see, the definition of unique is of which there is only one, unmatched, unequal, having no like, equal, or parallel. So it's quite specific. There's no partial uniqueness. So I talk to companies quite regularly, and I'll often say to them, we'll do an exercise on understanding what their USP is. And a number of companies will say to me, well, our unique selling propositions, we provide great customer service. Well, I'm sorry, that's not unique unless you can prove it, because I've never spoken to a company who says they provide poor customer service. What might be more powerful, for example, and a company that I deal with have this, is their USP is they have more 5-star Google reviews than any of their competitors. Now that's unique. That is unique. That's quite different. So to be truly unique, it's quite difficult. So what you can do is sometimes, as it says, you can overcome that lack of uniqueness by being innovative, different in your approach to what is a standard procedure. What do I mean by that? For example, in my banking days, we had a USP that we would answer the telephone within 3 rings. So for example, if you do that in your company, then that could be something unique. You might say, we return all messages within 24 hours. And those sort of things are standards. Everyone's going to return their phone calls, everyone's going to return messages. But if you can, as I said, basically look at a standard process and do it better, do it differently from your competition, then that's what's called, I guess, a positive discriminator. So it's an approach which you do which is standard, but you do it better than your clients. You do it faster. You do it more efficiently. That's unique. So have a think for your own businesses, certainly, about really what is your USP and is it really unique? So that's all good stuff. But the next question is, so what? What does that all mean? Your proposition has to pass that so what test. And basically what I mean by that is, how will your solution make things better for the client? How will it save time? How will it reduce costs? How will it improve a process? How will it increase efficiencies? And that's all around talking to the benefits. You probably heard, but if you haven't, I'll reiterate. It's all well and good talking about features, but you need to turn that into a benefit. And so we're going to do a little exercise on benefits now. So have a think about your own organization, your company, and what benefits does your solution have? I know this is generic, but it's individual to you as business owners. What benefits does your solution have? And how can you explain what the added value is to your solution? So I'm going to give you a minute while I catch my breath. Elsa's going to kindly keep an eye on the chat. And what I'd just like you to do is put some information in the chat in terms of what benefits you have in terms of your own company solutions. So I'll give you a minute to think about that.
Joshua, I do have a question. So tell me when you want that question.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. When demonstrating who will be working on the bid, what documents would be sufficient to demonstrate who is working on this, apart from the obvious CV?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what you need to do is just provide enough information to give a bit of background. So I guess what I'd say on that is provide a summary bio. So, you know, biography. So perhaps a paragraph. And if possible, I know it might sound a bit cheesy, but with a picture of the individual as well, because that just makes it a bit more real. I don't think you want to be literally sending CVs. If they want more information, the client will ask for that. But certainly one paragraph bio is in terms of your background, why you're adding value to the project and what your role is, with a picture would be useful. So I can't see the chat numbers going up, so don't be shy, people. Please do feel free to put something in the chat in terms of the benefits you have as your solution. Like I said at the outset, thinking's hard, so do think and do not be shy about putting some stuff in there, because you'll learn more by doing that than me just giving the answers, which I will do in a minute, but I'd like to get you to think about it a little bit first. It might be something like you've worked on a similar contract in the same sector, so you've got experience. And whenever you're trying to explain benefits, you can put down what it is you do. You can put down the feature and then link it to the phrase, which means that, which means that. So, you know, we've been in business for 10 years, which in the local authority sector, which means that we are able to understand your underlying challenges and needs. Oh, I can see the chat going up, so someone's put something in. Well done to you. Well done for that. Anything to share, Elsa?
Yeah, Janet says, my solution is tailored specific to a particular group of people, single parents.
Okay, so it's niche, so that's good. That's good. And I guess just extrapolating what I've just said, almost the next thing is, which means that. So what does that mean for the client? You don't have to put that in now, but that's, you know, your solution is niche. It's a clear feature, but what does that mean to the client when you're bidding for, you know, new business? Anyone else want to put something in? We've not got too much in here. So don't be shy. As I say, I will give you the answers, but it's worth having a little think yourself. Because if you can show how you're going to improve a process, if you can show how, you know, you're more cost efficient, you're going to be much more likely to be on your way to a winning bid. Okay, I've put you through enough torture and thinking, so I'll give you a few sort of primary benefits. These are typical benefits of any solution, and I won't go through every single one, but how are you going to save time? How are you going to reduce or eliminate costs, reduce risk, improve staff morale, improve margins, productivity, the key one here, reduce waste. That, you know, everything needs to be sustainable these days, much more environmentally friendly. You know, there's basically a number of different ways you can demonstrate benefits of your solution. How do you increase quality levels, reduce staff turnover levels? Elsa, you've got your hand up according to my screen. Did you want to chip in with something?
Yeah, just to say that, we've got 2 comments.
Excellent.
If I may. Experience is successfully running one of the biggest festivals in Europe, so it means confidence for the client being. And then, and then I've got the benefits my company offers are having staff who are well qualified in their fields, which means that we understand the health and social training, social training needs, quality auditing to get through CQC inspections.
That's fantastic. That's a real benefit. So well done for whoever's put that in. Yeah, it's clear, you've got the experience and you've said and explained why that's a benefit to the client. So fantastic. And with these benefits, try to attach something. If you can measure how you're going to add value, how you're going to reduce staff turnover, how you're going to increase margins, it's much more powerful, and gives a much greater value, a much greater perception of tangible value. Rather than just saying things, you can say, we're going to increase productivity by 5%, and the way we will measure it is, and if you can show that, you're going to be in a much stronger position. Okay, so to recap, we've understood the requirements. We've read the questions, we've understood those properly, we've done some research, we've spoken to the client. We've started to explain how we'll meet their needs and what the benefits are. That's all great stuff. But how do you make your story more believable? Well, in simple terms, you need to provide evidence. It's like if you go to court, you'll have, you know, the prosecution and the defense, and they'll all stand up and they'll provide evidence to back up their case, to back up their story. And that's exactly what you need to do when you're completing a tender response. You need to provide something that gives them the confidence that you're not just saying all these great things, but you can evidence why and how you will deliver on what you're saying. So, something else for you to think about, and that everyone likes a good story. What's the story for you and your business? So just for a moment, think about that. And if asked, what would your clients say about you? Okay, so think about that for a minute. You could put something in the chat if you like. And more importantly, or almost more importantly, what would you want them to say? Because if I sit here and tell you what a great business advisor I am, and I've dealt with loads of clients and I've added loads of value to these clients, you probably would say, well, yeah, you would say that, wouldn't you? You're not going to say anything different. But if you went onto my website and you saw that there were 15 or 20 5-star Google reviews saying what a good job I'd done and how it added value, it's much more powerful. So if you've got your clients saying good things about you and how you've added value, how you provided a solution, it's much more powerful than you saying it yourself. So just give that a little bit of thought. So another exercise for you to think about, and that is, how do you make what you say more believable? How can you back up your words? So again, I'll just give you a minute or so to think and pop something in on the chat. And it's all about backing up your story, backing up those words with evidence. How can you do that? Think about that for a minute and pop something in the chat. Don't be shy. I know you're getting the hang of this now. What can you provide as backup, as evidence to make people think, yeah, that's true? I've already given you one example, and that's Google reviews. I can see the chat increasing in numbers, so someone's putting something in there. That's great. At any point else, if there's anything you want to chip in for the benefit of the group, just do that, please.
Yeah, testimonials.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely true.
My clients would say that I've demonstrated my skills by getting them positive results that have benefited their businesses. Also highlight reviews, testimonials, awards that my company has won and case studies.
Fantastic. Yeah, fantastic.
Surveys.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is great. This is all good stuff. It's all good stuff and all true. And the more that sort of information you can provide, the stronger your case becomes.
We've got video.
Okay. Go ahead.
Videos of processing.
Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely great. Almost like a demo, proof of concept. So fantastic. Okay. That's great. That's great. I'm conscious that time is ticking away because I'm obviously having far too much fun. So let's crack on a little bit. Let's look at the different types of evidence, because there are a variety of different types. We've talked about some of these in your examples, which are great. So first of all, you've got what's called objective, independent evidence, which is probably it is the most powerful. So you may have some sort of accreditation. You may have an ISO 9001 accreditation. It shows you have a certain quality standard. You may have had a good, strong audit. I think you mentioned earlier, Elsa, just now, third-party market surveys, proof of demonstration, proof of concept, testimonials, all powerful and independent. You may have some references, awards, press articles. You might do visits to your site so prospective clients can see what it is you're doing and how. And that also all adds to your credibility. If you're really confident, you may even provide some form of financial guarantee. You then have business evidence. So you might have case studies. You might have details of your project methodology. When I say project methodology, you have formal project management qualifications, and you can demonstrate that you've managed projects of a certain size, like you're bidding for now, and therefore you have the technical knowledge and experience and expertise. What are your operating procedures? This is all powerful stuff. Elsa, your hand has been raised again. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just I'd
good
add
stuff. Great.
Getting 3 companies through their Ofsted inspections, and well, I point people to my Instagram page where they can see customers' response and see video when catering big events. Sorry, I know they're slowly coming in, but I thought it's still relevant.
No, that's all very important. It's very important. And I think it's good to share knowledge and experience amongst the attendees as well, because everyone will have their own knowledge and experience. So, it's great to share that. So just keep putting your hand up and interrupting. That's absolutely fine. Okay, so now moving on to company evidence. This is a little bit weaker because it's information that you as a company, you as an organization will have produced yourself. So it'll be your sort of marketing material. It'll be statements that you've made, which basically say, look, trust me, or you might be providing opinions on the sector, on the market. You may have, certain policies or CVs of individuals which demonstrate how you have experience in the things that you do. So again, it's useful. It's absolutely better than nothing, but it's not as strong as that objective third-party evidence. And then there may be some sort of sector evidence. And what I mean by that is you may operate in a sector, for example, in the care sector, which is quite carefully regulated. And, you have certain processes, certain procedures, certain approaches you need to follow as a sector. And that's great, but obviously that's the sort of information that all your competitors will also be relying upon. So again, useful to have, but not as strong as the objective, independent evidence. And then finally, you have what's called operational evidence. And in that case, what I'm talking about here is you are the existing provider. So you're re-tendering for business. And when you're in that position, you should be in a stronger position because you can show how you previously undertook and implemented your solution. You'll have information over the period of the contract, which you've presumably been providing to the customer by way of regular reports, management information. You may have some feedback, some customer satisfaction data from stakeholders, from the actual customer themselves. You can demonstrate ways where you've added value. You've had a positive impact on the customer's organization, what challenges you faced, how you overcame them, how you resolved them. And you may have some positive feedback that you've had throughout the contract term. So, if you've got the contract already, you can start building up lots of data, lots of useful ammunition, which you can use, and that should put you in a stronger position when you're re-tendering for a contract where you are the existing provider. So there are lots and lots of different types of evidence that you can provide. And just a broad rule about evidence generally: make sure it's relevant to the bid, to the client, to the market, to the service. For example, if you're bidding for some local authority business and you've worked in the sector before, you've worked for another local authority, then tell them how you've added value, tell them how you've provided your solution, because they all talk to each other. Without getting into too much detail, that's a real strength for the company that I work with, Brand You in. We've been working with local authorities and chambers of commerce for some years. They trust us because we can demonstrate how we added value within their sectors. Make sure your evidence is current. When I speak to any business, the first thing I do is typically I Google the business name and I see if there are any Google reviews, and I then go to the website. If there are no Google reviews, that's a red flag for me, because I think, well, that's somewhat unusual. If there are some Google reviews, but they may be a year or two old, that's also a bit of a question mark. But if you've got half a dozen current reviews, then it's just much, much more powerful. So what I would say to you is spend some time developing that evidence, developing your case studies, your testimonials, your Google reviews, your LinkedIn reviews, because all that evidence will add to your brand, your reputation, and your credibility when you're bidding. So include that within your planning process when you're thinking about how and what evidence you can provide, because it all will help strengthen your case. And evaluators, they will be looking for evidence. They'll be looking for the proof that of all the good things you're saying, they can believe it because of the evidence. Okay, let's move on to the next rule. We're going to talk a little bit now, or when I say we, I'm going to talk a bit more now about writing styles. And the first golden rule I've put up there is less is more. Write accurately, write clearly, and write concisely. And there's a skill in doing this. Believe me, it's not easy to write less. And the sort of things I'm going to talk about for the next 5 minutes or so, you can use it in any written communication that you need to do. So it's useful for you in your business, not just for tender responses, but any written communication. So let's just run through some of the things here. Don't distract, basically, from what you're trying to say. Because the evaluators, they're typically, it's not a full-time job being an evaluator. So what they want is they want clear, concise information where they can find the answers and the evidence to their questions easily. Make it as easy as possible for them. Don't distract them, because that'll really help them. For example, in my banking days, we used to have relationships. I worked for Lloyds. We used to have some relationships with some very large international banks. And every now and then, the chief execs of the two banks would meet up for a big high-level powwow. And one of my jobs as a more junior person was to write a one-page executive brief on the relationship. And these were relationships that had been going on for maybe 10, 20, 30 years, very complex, very, very detailed, lots of elements to the relationship, lots of different products. And the challenge was to get all that information down on one sheet of A4. And let me tell you, that is not an easy skill. But the point is, you're writing for the benefit of the recipient, for the benefit of the evaluators. So don't just think, well, I'll put in everything I can because that'll be helpful, because it won't. It'll just distract them, it'll confuse them, and they won't spend loads and loads of time looking for the right answer if it's sort of padded around with information that's not relevant. So don't distract them. Don't put too much information in if you can help it. So here are some important rules about being precise and clear. So don't use metaphors. Things like it's raining cats and dogs. I've got a heart of gold. These things just confuse. They don't make things clear at all. It just makes it, it just clutters up the response. Don't use long words when short ones will do. Always write the way you speak. So let me give you an example. So what you should say, for example, is, we will show you how our proposed solution will reduce costs by 10%. rather than something like, our leading edge methodology and options analysis will demonstrate increased efficiencies across your process. Well, what does that mean? Be clear, be precise. Always try and use the active rather than the passive where you can. I'll give you a little example about that in a minute. And don't use business terminology, blue sky thinking outside the box. Write in simple, everyday English. Don't use jargon. It'll just make it much clearer. Write for the benefit of your audience. Very simple example. My son is an engineer for Aston Martin. No free cars, unfortunately. But he's a very technical guy. And if you're writing a report for him or a proposal for him, you'd have to write in technical terms. But if you're writing a proposal, for example, for me, if you use that level of terminology and technical terms, it would just go straight over my head. So write for the benefit of the audience, write for the benefit of the recipient. And the final thing is, break any of those rules rather than say something that's absolutely irrelevant. So don't put anything in that doesn't add value to your proposal. It'll differentiate you from your competition. So I talked about active and passive writing. You can Google what that actually means, but essentially active writing, an active writing style is more assertive and it generally uses less words. And sometimes you'll be under restrictions in terms of a word count. So in certain document responses, tender responses, particularly local authorities, they will say you can only use 500 words in your response. So an example, a couple of examples. Passive, Oliver Twist was written by Charles Dickens. But active, which is a bit more powerful, is Charles Dickens wrote Oliver Twist. It's a bit more punchy, it uses less words. But like everything, there's always an exception to the rule. They generally use active, not passive. Here's an example where actually it works the other way around. So the passive is, the opera singer was heckled by an onlooker in the crowd. More words, firstly. But the active is, an onlooker in the crowd heckled the opera singer. The reason why the passive is more acceptable, or is acceptable in this case, is the opera singer is the key element of this phrase. So in this case, you could actually use the passive. I hope that doesn't come across as too complicated, but it just gives an example of how to write more clearly and assertively using a different style. I said earlier, avoid jargon, avoid Americanisms. They often use a Z or a Z instead of an S. Don't use hyperboles. It's not hyperboles, as I sometimes hear people saying, which are essentially exaggerate the statement. Things like, oh, I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. Don't use, as I said earlier, business jargon, thinking outside the box, blue sky thinking. It just doesn't really mean anything. Just be much more clear. Write in clear English. As it says there, what hyperboles are. And don't use random capitalization. It distracts, it looks messy, it just doesn't really work. It comes across as shouting. So don't use capitals when you're trying to emphasize a point. Emphasize it more with the information you're saying. And be positive in the way you're writing. So always use will rather than things like would, could, can, should, propose. It's just much more assertive. It's much more powerful. And another example of I see which is incorrect in terms of the writing style is when you've got an organization, you're referring to an organization or a company using the plural. So we should say Branduin is running this workshop, not Branduin are running this workshop. Okay, so I've got another little exercise for you to think about. Last exercise, you're doing great. We won't have time to completely rewrite this, but have a quick look at that paragraph in white on the slide, and just think, or if you want to write down in the box, what are the key elements of that paragraph which need to be retained, and what is superfluous, what is fluff, what is padding. Think about that just for 30 seconds or so. You can either put something in the chat or just pop something down in writing, and I'll just show you what that is in a minute, because I'll show you how you can reduce that down from basically a word count of something like 61 words to 27, which is like, much clearer, much more punchy. I'll just give you a second for that or two. Okay, it's getting late and you've been working hard, so let me give you the answers. And you can try this out with any written communication you've done in your own business. So that's the 61 words before. And what I've done there is I've highlighted in red what are the key phrases or words that need to be retained in the revised, shortened, punchier version. So that's the before. And then you can see there, basically, we reduced the word count by nearly 56% to 27 words. And it's just as clear, well, it's not just as clear, it's much more clear. And you could even shorten that down further without being as formal as saying Potter's LLP, Macro Companies Limited, by saying we and your. So the whole point there is don't use superfluous language, don't pad things out, keep it punchy, keep it clear, keep it precise and accurate, and it will come across much more positively. Here are some examples. There's examples in red down the right, the sort of long worded versions of things. So on a regular basis, well, one word will do there, regularly. You know, going down the list, has an ability to, can, on 2 separate occasions, twice. You know, it sounds obvious, but you know, if you start to use these more padded phrases, it just distracts from the ultimate message. So try and be clear, try and be concise. Here are some examples, basically, which will either make you laugh or cry. Things like the red words are superfluous. So looking at the third one, for example, after careful scrutiny. Well, the definition of scrutiny is looking at something carefully. You know, we will entirely eliminate. Well, eliminate means to completely get rid of. So it will be entirely. We will eradicate completely mistakes. Well, eradicate means to get rid of entirely, so completely. It's mostly foreign imports. Well, have you ever come across an import that isn't foreign? Well, as far as I'm concerned, any import comes from abroad. So there's a lot of ways you can cut down and reduce your word count just by thinking about what you're saying and how you're saying it. So do use fewer words, because evaluators will definitely appreciate it. And it's a way actually of connecting better. The big reviewer and evaluator will appreciate it, and it differentiates you from your competition. If you've got a response, for example, that's 10 pages, I'm just making this up as I go along, and you've got, well, let's say you've got 6 responses that are 10 pages and you've got 1 at 5, you know, which one do you think they'd be more happy to read? As long as it's clear, as long as it's got all the information, your point should come across much more strongly in a more condensed version rather than padding it out with superfluous words and information. So the writing style should be written for the benefit of the evaluator. Okay, so we're coming to the end nearly. So let's just do a little summary of where we've come from and what we've looked at. So for example, in terms of the overall invitation to tender, you know, you need to make sure you've read the instructions, you've met the requirements, you've considered all the questions carefully. Then you've got to answer that fundamental question. Why should they choose you? Why your company? How are you standing out from your competition? What's your differentiating story? Why would they pick you? What are the reasons? Have you been working to the customer's agenda? Can you demonstrate understanding of what their needs are? How well have you explained their approach? As I said, it's all about the client. I talked in the first session about putting yourself in the mind of the client. If you can do that, you'll be in a much stronger position to write a winning bid rather than just thinking about it from your own perspective. Have you clearly explained the benefits, how they can be measured, how you'll add value, how you'll be innovative? Is your proposal well written? Is it professional? Have you had it independently checked, not just for typos, but is it, you know, well formatted? Has it answered the questions clearly, concisely, in a way that is easier for the evaluator to score highly? And finally, what evidence have you provided? How can you make that story of yours, how can you make those positive words more believable? Because if you can encompass all those things into your bid response, you're going to be well on the way to a winning bid. So the final golden rule, maybe it's not politically correct, but it's not the taking part that's important, it's winning, it's winning. So if you can take most of the recommendations, tips, suggestions, and best practice ideas that we've talked about in these 2 sessions, you will be well on the way to a strong winning bid. So where can you find all these bid opportunities? There are a number of different portals, but I've just given you a few there, which will be hopefully useful for you. If you're bidding for business within London, there's the London Tenders portal. There's a similar tenders portal for the national country, of course. And there are various other ones like Find a Tender, Contracts Finder. Have a think about the sort of tenders and business that you want to bid for, and then get yourself registered on these portals. So you'll get alerts when businesses are putting the sort of business out in tender that your company can bid for successfully. We did touch a little bit about this in the first session. I'm using Brent as an example, but the information is all out there, and it's just a case of looking for it. The internet makes it a lot easier, but you've got to look. You know, if you use Brent as an example, they've got sections within their website about contracting and tendering. They talk about what's important to them. Like I said, the head of procurement, they've got a business procurement strategy. Within that strategy, it talks about a number of things that they look for from their bidders. It talks about, you know, what's important to them, their key drivers, sustainability, you know, building a stronger business community within Brent and keeping the money within Brent. There's lots and lots of useful information out there which you can find. So do your research, you know, do literally sort of dig deep. Because as I said, the more you know about your clients, the better and stronger position you will be in when you're submitting your tender response. So that just talks about the business and the Brent procurement strategy document, which will give you a huge amount of helpful and useful information. It will give you details on their spend, you know, how much they're looking to spend next year, what sectors, you know, it's all out there for you to find, and you just need to go and find it. Right, we're getting close. There's the procurement strategy document. As I said at the outset, the program is quite comprehensive that we're providing here. There's obviously the bidding seminars. Elsa, you can feel free to chip in on this. I know you're leading the program. So we've had, from my side, the introduction to bid writing, you know, this session today. Elsa, did you want to touch on any of the others? If not, I can, but I'm happy to rest my voice if you want to talk a little bit about the others.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the next one that we've got coming up on the 12th of April, which
Fantastic.
is the business model strategy and innovation. And those of you that have had one-to-ones with me so far will know that I talk about the business model canvas. So for me, that's the foundation. And what I'll be doing at the next webinar is going through the 9 sections that actually make up the business model canvas. But one thing I'd like people to start thinking about is their value proposition. Okay, what value do you deliver to the customer? In other words, which one of the customer's problems are you helping to solve? So that's something that, you know, we'll be talking about in a lot of detail, but it's a one-page business plan. It's the document that when you're thinking of an idea, you put it all down on one page over the 9 areas. Or if you're actually running a business and you want to perhaps think of the next, you know, section or the next level or the next few months of the business, again, we put it all down on the one-page business plan. So that's the what I really wanted to stress was the next one. It's the foundation. This is where we get the, you know, start the work and begin to move towards all that Nosha has actually shared with us today. And then on the 10th of May, we then go into the design and development products and services for procurement. So I suppose, again, Nosha has covered a lot of that, but I suppose it's looking and refining most of that, but in detail. But what I like about these webinars is the way that everything is broken down, as opposed to everything all happening in one webinar. And then we move swiftly on to LinkedIn, creating an effective presence. And you and I know that most of us may have LinkedIn, but how often do we actually revisit it and actually allow LinkedIn to work for us? Some people think it's a CV, they put it out there and leave it and leave it and leave it for years without thinking, actually, how can I make it more interesting? How can I connect with people? And how can I allow LinkedIn to work, for me or for you on a daily basis? And then at the area that is very important, that's coming up on the 7th of June, is a circular economy and developing key partnerships. Now, a lot of you will turn around and say, well, actually, circular economy, that's not me. I'm too small. That's for large companies, corporations, etc. No, it's not. If you actually come to this webinar, you'll see how important the circular economy is needed in our day-to-day and what we do. And especially if we need to join up with other people and, create partnerships, you'd be surprised by, creating partnerships and looking closely at the circular economy, how your business will be taken to the next level. So if you're thinking about growth and sustainability moving forward, definitely I'll say to you, come to all the forthcoming webinars and you will actually benefit. And not to forget that we do have the one-to-one business sessions that I keep on talking about. And as I say, those who've already attended those will already know the benefits. Okay, sorry, Nasha, over to you.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. Saved my voice. Fantastic. Thank you, Elsa. That's very, very helpful. And I endorse everything that Elsa says, of course. And, these webinars, I know time is precious for everyone in business, but they're all run by experts in their field who can provide practical experience as well as, excuse me, technical expertise. So that's about it. I don't think I'll spend any more time on the one-to-ones. We've touched upon that. It's a very structured process with measurable actions. So do get yourself booked in with Elsa if you haven't done so already, and you'll find that they're very valuable in terms of maybe being able to handle those sort of more sensitive, bespoke issues that are particular to you and your business. And that's just about it from me. I don't know if there are any more questions or comments or feedback in the chat. So if there is, I'll happily try and answer them. If not, do put some feedback in the chat. And as I said to you at the outset, if you're brave enough to put in one thing you're going to do as a result of listening to this tender, even if it might just be like, watch the first one if you weren't here, then do share that. If you don't want to, that's fine, but commit to doing something, because that's the way you'll learn. And I'll hand you back to Elsa, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Nastia. I did want to say there is one person who's written something in the chat. Can I share it with you just in case?
Of course.
He says, as a startup, how can you demonstrate a lot of the value you've just shared to obtain a tender? I've experienced that a lot of the bids have already been decided prior to companies even tendering. How do you overcome that as a startup?
That's a very good question. And I think it's very difficult, is the honest answer. And I'm always honest. I think when you are a startup, and I was one of those 7 or 8 years ago, it is difficult to demonstrate your track record, your credibility. And really the only way to do that is to start. So get that first client, whether it's a smaller one, and get that first case study. It might sound a statement of the obvious, but it really is a case of you just need to start building up that content, building up those case studies, building up those testimonials. In terms of tenders being pre-decided, they're not, but I know exactly how you feel, because typically, the incumbent provider, that's the supplier who has the existing contract, will often, as I said in the presentation, be in a very strong position. And you've got to be really over and above in terms of your value add, possibly a more competitive price, experience, to be able to dislodge the existing contract provider. And I found this myself in the world of banking. When we were tendering for business that we either were the current provider and that we were in a strong position, or when we were trying to dislodge an existing company. So I think the answer is there's no quick and easy solution, but if you follow the sort of steps that I've outlined, and obviously we can talk about that more in a one-to-one session, because there are one-to-one sessions, Elsa can talk to you more about that in one-to-one sessions, you will start to build up that evidence, you will start to build up that reputation, track record, and brand image to help you be more successful. But it is tough as a startup, I fully acknowledge that.
And I think as Nels has actually written in the chat, startups who want to tender should consider partnering.
Yeah, definitely.
Because, you know, I've seen that happen over the years and how successful that is. And
Yeah.
then someone's written, committing to be concise, prone to meandering down waffle alley. Or there I go again. I don't know. Yeah.
No, it's absolutely true. As I said, but don't pad it out by thinking that that'll help. It will not help. Keep it short, keep it sharp, keep it punchy, and you'll certainly find that puts you in a much stronger and better position in terms of your bid response.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Nosha, all I can say is thank you very much for yet another excellent webinar. I know that everybody here has actually gained something from it. And I know those that have met with me on a one-to-one, it's beginning now to, I won't say make sense, it's beginning to now come into play, because they can see, having gone through the business model canvas and then, you know, just talking through the whole bidding process, a lot of it is just common sense. Do you see what I mean? I mean, I love the way that you talked about using simplified language as opposed to, you know, loads and loads of words, whereas sometimes we feel we need to prove or demonstrate that we understand, you know, the sector in writing. No, it's about putting it down in writing, on paper, in a simplified way. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. I guess just to round up, I mean, the tendering bidding process, let's be honest, when you're doing it for the first time, it takes quite a bit of time and effort. But if you as a company have decided, you've taken an approach, or you've got a strategy to try and get involved with larger contracts, maybe with certain local authorities or certain private sector companies, like in Brent, you've got Wembley Stadium, you've got these massive developments around Alperton, you've got the huge retail park, all those large private sector organisations as well as public sector will be putting out business to tender. And if you feel that you've got a service that can add value, can benefit those companies, then it's worth putting in that time and effort, and it does become easier. The first one will always be the hardest, it'll always take longest, it'll always be, you'll always be thinking, crikey, there's a huge amount of time I'm spending on this. But from a strategic perspective, if that's the route you're going to go down, it's worth the effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks very much. Unless anyone's got anything else they want to say or share, I just want to thank again, I can keep thanking you all day for simplifying the whole process, because I know people find this section very daunting. Do you know what I mean?
My pleasure. No, hopefully it's helped.
Yeah, it did definitely. Okay, so thank you all again, and we'll see you soon. As I say, the next event is it the 12th of April? Yeah, the 12th of April, we'll be going through the business model canvas, and book those one-to-ones with me, especially if you want to start looking at some of the opportunities that are out there. Okay,